moments ago. Watch this. This is the side of the building just collapsing. There you see. There you see. Now, whether that is the result of just further weakening of the structure of the building, or whether that's yet another terrorist attack, I don't know. I would imagine the former, that the building structure just weakens to the point where the wall, no longer able to sustain the weight, just caved. But that was the.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry.
We're building a strong coalition to go after these perpetrators.
It is my duty as head of this department to tell you that more, much more, will be asked of you in the weeks and months ahead.
As the Young administration grapples with the toughest of decisions, investigators search for clues.
And worried families search for closure. A nation tries to come to terms with the loss of life and the loss of certainty.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Mann.
And I'm Lalitza Vasileva at the CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America under attack.
They are points on a map and clues to a phenomenal crime. Boston, Florida, perhaps, government sources say, even Afghanistan. Investigators swooped down Wednesday on a Boston hotel and Florida homes that may be linked to Tuesday's attacks. Several people have been detained as material witnesses. Law enforcement sources say they believe 12 to 24 hijackers were involved in the attacks, with as many as 50 people taking part in the planning. In New York and Washington, authorities continue dealing with the remnants of the catastrophe while still searching for survivors. President George W. Bush set out Wednesday to see the Pentagon for himself.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry. And our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share the same values we share, by people who are willing to destroy people's lives.
CNN has obtained a partial transcript of comments made in the cockpit of one of the 4 hijacked airliners. As Kelly Arena reports, the conversation offers a chilling glimpse of the final minutes of United Flight 93.
Sometime before United Airlines Flight 93 went down in Pennsylvania, a microphone in the cockpit was left open. Air traffic controllers heard shouting, someone yelling, "Get out of here!" The microphone is momentarily turned off. It comes back on. Scuffling is heard, and again, a voice yells, "Get out of here!" The microphone is again turned off. When it's turned on again, it is clear the pilot is no longer in the cockpit. Someone is heard speaking in broken English, in what was described as an Arabic accent, telling passengers, quote, "There is a bomb on board. This is the captain speaking. Remain in your seat. There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting their demands. We are returning to the airport." While this was going on in the cockpit, we have information about what was happening in the cabin. One passenger, 31-year-old Jeremy Glick, was flying with his 2-month-old child. He called home from the doomed plane. He said the passengers were herded to the rear of the plane by a trio of hijackers, armed with knives and a red box they say contained a bomb. When Glick's family confirmed for him what another passenger heard, that a plane had already struck the World Trade Center, Glick dropped the phone, then returned to tell his family the male passengers had taken a vote to attack the hijackers. Glick wasn't heard from again. The plane held 38 passengers and a crew of 8. Kelly Arena, CNN, Washington.
Investigators are sifting through documents, home computers, and flight school records in Florida. Susan Candiotti told us earlier authorities suspect some of the hijackers received flight training there.
The FBI indeed has leads on suspected hijackers that were involved in this terrorist attack. They are still hijackers who attended flight schools here in Florida. And at this hour, the FBI continues to look at other flight schools here in Florida. Law enforcement sources say that 2 of the suspected hijackers, at least 2 of them, lived here in Vero Beach. 2 of them are brothers that lived here. 1 of them lived on this very street. Both are described as Saudi citizens. One of them is Adnan Bukhari. Adnan Bukhari, we have a photograph of him. He is said to be in his 40s. He is described as a commercial pilot for Saudi Arabian Airlines. Also living in Vero Beach, Bukhari's brother Amir. Both lived here with their wives and children. Now, this afternoon, we also had a chance to go inside one of their rented homes. This is the one rented by Adnan Bukhari. It was searched this day by the FBI, and according to documents left behind by agents, they seized a number of items, including a computer software, U.S. immigration papers, bank receipts, phone cards, a flight safety bag. We also saw a pilot's certificate, as well as a certificate that they had received specialized instruction on multi-engine planes. These pilots, we are told by law enforcement sources, attended Flight Safety International, a flight school here in Vero Beach. Law enforcement sources also tell CNN that the Bukhari brothers were believed to have been on one of the 2 flights out of Boston, one of those 2 flights that wound up slamming into the World Trade Center. Also, we can report to you that a car impounded in Portland, Maine, according to law enforcement authorities, was rented at Boston Logan Airport and driven to Portland, Maine. Now, the Maine State Police confirmed that 2 of the suspected hijackers were on a U.S. air flight out of Logan Airport, again, one of the 2 planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. The FBI also looking at 2 more suspected hijackers who spent some time both in Venice, Florida, as well as Coral Springs, Florida, which is located in the south. The 2 are Mohammed Atta and Marwan Youssef al-Shahi. Now, they stayed for a few days at the home of Charlie Voss in Venice, Florida, and they took courses at Hoffman Aviation.
Meeting in New York, the United Nations paused for a moment of silence to honor Tuesday's victims. Diplomats expressed condolences and their solidarity with the United States.
Today, both the Security Council and the General Assembly, today Wednesday, adopted unanimous resolutions expressing horror and revulsion at what had happened and pledging to assist the United States to bring the perpetrators to justice. In fact, when the Security Council voted in an unprecedented gesture, the members of the Council stood up instead of raising their hands to vote. It was an act that symbolized the world standing together standing behind the United States.
Attack one and you attack all. With that conviction, NATO's 19 members have taken the unprecedented step of invoking Article 5 of the NATO Charter. A NATO statement said, quote, each ally will assist the party that has been attacked by taking such action as it deems necessary. Accordingly, the United States NATO allies stand ready to provide the assistance that may be required as a consequence of these acts of barbarism, end of quote. NATO authorities stressed there is no talk at this time of military intervention. Secretary of State Colin Powell is making clear one country that he thinks ought to help in the investigation.
We have not made a determination yet as to who is responsible for yesterday's attack, but we thought, as we gather information and as we look at possible sources of the attack, it would be useful to point out to the Pakistani leadership at every level that we are looking for and expecting their fullest cooperation and their help and support as we conduct this investigation and as we generate more information.
Pakistan's President General Pervez Musharraf is scheduled to meet with the U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan Thursday. Tom Mentir is in Islamabad and joins us now on the phone. Tom.
Really Highlights of that meeting will occur within the hour here in Islamabad. The Pakistani president returned late last night from Karachi. He was there for naval exercises when the incident in the United States took place. He did come back last night and had about a 4-hour meeting with his cabinet, including his foreign minister and foreign secretary. The meeting today is more pomp and circumstance than an actual sit-down meeting, which may come later. There are 5 ambassadors from Brunei, Germany, Poland, the United States, and Singapore who are presenting their credentials to the Pakistani president today at the president's office. So they will have the opportunity to sit side by side and maybe chat. But a long discussion may be set for some time later. The newly installed ambassador has been here for about a month, but the Pakistani government is now accepting the credentials of these 5 ambassadors today at a ceremony at the president's office. So it is quite likely, as they sit side by side when the credentials are presented, that Wendy Chamberlain, the new U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, will have the opportunity to present Mr. Colin Powell's message directly to the Pakistani president. Ralitza?
And Tom, is Pakistan going to use its influence over the Taliban?
Well, that remains to be seen. There was a message delivered by the Pakistani president on Pakistan TV early this morning, basically saying how terrible this act was against the United States, but just how much they're going to do in cooperation with the U.S. government in the investigation and any other action that may come down the road remains to be seen. But I'm sure that this even brief meeting between the incoming U.S. ambassador to Pakistan and the Pakistani president will be an important one if there is a message the United States wants to deliver to the Pakistani government.
Tom, thank you.
The tragedy has sent shockwaves around the world, at times uniting people in their grief. Nowhere is that more evident than in the epicenter, New York City. CNN's Garrick Utley joins us now from there. Garrick?
Thank you, Jonathan. As we here at CNN, indeed as you viewers in the United States around the world follow the aftermath of this tragedy, we learn a thing or two about ourselves. And one of these is how we seem to be drawn to these often horrific images, not, I suspect, out of any sense of sensationalism or voyeurism, but simply because these images, when we see them again and again, perhaps help us to digest the full magnitude of what has happened here. Now, from time to time, we're able to get new pictures, new images, or at least new perspectives of what has and is happening, and that's the case now because often they come from amateur video operators, not the pros. These are people who can get in there on the scene of the action where the pros can't get for security reasons. That's the case in this report from Jason Bellini of CNN.
A disorienting, smoldering, apocalyptic wasteland from Jonathan Shanner's eye view of the World Trade Center disaster. He's a 23-year-old rescue volunteer for the Red Cross.
It feels really empty. It feels, excuse me, but dead.
He took a CNN handheld camera inside the wreckage.
When I was looking through the big crater, I started realizing that there's just probably dead bodies among all the debris, and it got to me.
Jonathan isn't sure exactly where he was shooting or where he was even working. It's too confusing, and instructions to volunteers, he says, are scarce.
Everyone's doing the same thing.
Cool.
Police, rescuers, fire, us, any volunteers from whatever organizations, they're walking through there looking for people, digging things up.
There was one picture he wished he could have shown us, but it never happened.
I wish I could have caught a rescue or someone coming out alive. It is what it is.
What it is indescribable, even with pictures. Jason Bellini, CNN, New York.
And that was the view, the perspective of one 23-year-old American during this day there, during the rescue operations. Let's check in on what's happening this evening, or indeed in the early morning hours Eastern Time here in the United States from Alessio Vinci. Alessio, what can you report?
Well, Garrick, it's been 40 hours or so since the twin towers of the World Trade Center have been collapsed after being hit by those 2 hijacked planes. And as you can see behind me, 40 hours later still a white cloud billowing atop the rubble of those 2 110 stories building on the ground there. Hundreds of rescue workers, paramedics, police officers, all involved in this rescue operation, trying to figure out if there is anybody perhaps that may still be alive under that rubble. That we spent some hours earlier today. We saw several refrigerator trucks arriving into the scene, presumably to take some of the bodies or body parts out. We also saw a long line of dumpster trucks that were obviously being used to bring some of the rubbles away from the scene and make room for more trucks to go in there and take some of the more rubble out. We understand so far 3,000 tons of rubble have been removed early today. The mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, said earlier today that 82 bodies have been found inside the rubble. Only 16 of them have so far been identified. This tells us a little bit about how intense this collapse of this building was. If so far only 16 bodies have been identified, the rescue workers there are telling us that mainly they have been finding body parts. Of course, the number of casualties as the rescue operation continues is expected to rise dramatically. Mayor Giuliani has requested to the Federal Emergency Management Agency 6,000 body bags. Meanwhile, the entire area of south of 14th Street here in Lower Manhattan has been sealed off by the police. Several blocks in this area remain without electricity. That is why many people have been evacuated, especially the elderly people, especially in this building right behind me. As you can see, a dark black building behind me. And of course, some other people chose to live on their own. However, we also met some Manhattan people here in Lower Manhattan who decided to say, one person telling us, look, I lived here for all my life. I don't really feel like leaving at this time. Back to you, Garrick.
Alessio, I think looking at these scenes there and your reporting there, a question that comes to many of our minds is this is a 24-hour ongoing operation. Will be for weeks, months to come to get that rubble out and complete the search there. How long are these shifts, the workers down there? Are they working 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours? I mean, how long can their stamina last?
I think they work on 12-hour shifts, Garrick. That's what we've been hearing throughout the day. And I was reading one report earlier that it would take between 30 and 60 days, about 2 months, to clear out the entire area. I think what the rescue officials there are doing now is still in this a few days after the attack, still trying to go really slowly, trying to really hear if they can hear anybody from underneath the rubble. We heard yesterday there were some phone calls that were made from some people underneath that rubble, so perhaps the rescue operation is going slowly because they want to make sure that by removing that rubble, they do not create any kind of shifting. There are also buildings in the area there that are structural damages, and therefore the operation is being very slow. But certainly those workers have been working very, very hard, most of them 12-hour shifts, but perhaps some of the rescue operations there, rescue workers there, even working longer hours than that. We've seen a lot of people very tired, but very determined to continue in this operation, that they understand that any life they can save is a good job they can do.
Thank you very much, Alessio Vinci, and I think we can all try to comprehend or grasp, but 12-hour shifts under those conditions, perhaps for another 30 or even 60 days, 2 months to come. Back now to Jonathan and Ralitz in Atlanta.
Garrick, one question for you. People have been commenting on things that we wouldn't notice on television, that there's a strange smell in the air in New York, that there's a strange quiet. You aren't immediately on the scene, but even now in the middle of the night, do you notice that New York feels different?
It started to change this afternoon. Yes, it's still quieter than it is normally at this hour of night or early morning, because even at 2 or 3 a.m. Eastern time, the streets are filled with traffic. This is a very active place, needless to say. But the city did start to come back to some life today, and it will even more tomorrow. Just to take one example, tomorrow Broadway theaters will reopen. Times Square will have its lights powered up, and once again it'll be crowded because it's far away from the disaster area. As far as the smell is concerned, in Lower Manhattan, there's that mixture of smoke and dust in the air. It's just the smell of smoke and dust in the air. Although, as I mentioned earlier, at one point during this day, a beautiful sunny blue sky day again, the wind shifted and some of that smell was felt in Midtown and in the ritziest, most expensive parts of the city, Fifth Avenue, Central Park, the Upper East Side and West Side. So everybody in Manhattan got a whiff of that today.
Now the air is clearing. Garrick Utley, New York. Thanks very much. Ralitza.
John, people around the world are showing their sympathy as European leaders put up a united front against what they call an attack on the free world. Christian Amanpour reports from London.
Flags are flown at half-staff in England and around Europe. Flowers pile up at U.S. embassies. Sympathy and especially shock are growing. In the wake of the worst terrorist attack anywhere, on a scale Western leaders say they had never even contemplated. Newspapers talk of a declaration of war on America. Politicians from the world's democracies say that today everyone is American.
We all agreed that this attack is an attack not only on America, but on the free and democratic world. It demands our complete and united condemnation, our determination to bring those responsible to justice.
European bourses and brokers suspended trading for a minute to show respect for the dead.
Un minuto di silenzio.
European leaders have called emergency security meetings, and for the first time in its history, NATO has invoked its Cold War treaty that provides for all members to come to the defense of any one of its members under attack.
We stand firm, we stand committed. Thank you very much.
One after the other, world leaders stood up in sympathy and solidarity.
Сегодня Соединенные Штаты
President
Америки
Vladimir Putin saying that Russia will observe a moment of silence on Thursday. German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder says that Germany stands with America and everyone who's for peace and freedom around the world. The same messages came from all European capitals, from Japanese leaders, and the Chinese president as well. There were sour notes sounded too. Some people in some countries said the catastrophe should be a warning to the United States. To have so many people die, though it's unreasonable, is a warning to Bush and his administration not to make policies that bully other countries, says this Chinese taxi driver. Back in Britain, which is one of America's strongest and closest allies, Prince Charles came to offer condolences to the United States ambassador, mindful that many Britons working in New York are likely to be among the victims. Prime Minister Blair said that all European leaders and the President of Russia are trying now to forge a united front to try to identify, defeat and dismantle what he called this machinery of terror. Christiana Manpour, CNN, London.
Fear is beginning to spread among Arab American and Muslim communities that they may become targets for abuse. As Thelma Gutierrez reports, many believe that the backlash has in fact already begun.
Serene Sawaf is a 21-year-old university student. She is Muslim. She fears her scarf may make her a target.
Women receiving threats, take off your scarf or else we'll shoot you and go back to your country, and just awful, awful remarks.
This guy is cool. Samir, Adam, and Ali were born in California. It is home. Today, they play indoors.
I am afraid that they might start being mean to Muslims like they did 200 years ago to black people.
Tamina Tanir and Fidi Hakim couldn't take their kids to school. The school was closed down for security reasons.
My children go to a Muslim school, and I'm scared for their security.
It's a terrible way to live, they say. After all, they are Americans, Arab Americans.
I feel 100% American. I've been raised here.
I'm really angry too, because you have to understand that even though I'm Muslim, I am American, and I cannot stand it that they did this. I cannot see how there could be any good in bombing the World Trade Center and hurting so many innocent people.
But Islamic centers in many cities are reporting the backlash is starting.
We received reports from New York City of people getting pulled out of their taxi cabs who looked Arab, and they were beaten up, and children who were beaten up.
The terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania were denounced by Muslim countries throughout the world, including Iran, Libya, and Jordan. In Afghanistan, Taliban leaders accused of harboring terrorists condemned the attacks. So did Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat.
We are completely shocked.
In Texas, 2 mosques were vandalized, their windows either shot out or broken. In San Francisco, California, blood was poured on the sidewalk of an Islamic community center.
I'm blown away because I'd expect that people realize that this is not American. This is completely un-American.
Adam says he hopes people will not confuse him with the bad guys.
I'm just going to try to show that I'm kind and I'm innocent and I'm just a good person.
Thelma Gutierrez, CNN, Los Angeles.
The human cost of this tragedy remains uppermost in people's minds, but economists are also watching the financial implications. Richard Quest joins us now from Europe's financial capital, London, with more. Richard?
Jonathan, you're absolutely right. It is a sad fact, of course, in these situations that even while the bodies are being counted, we have to concern ourselves with the financial implications. But this was indeed an attack on the World Trade Centers at the heart of world capitalism. So let me now update you with what's been happening on the European financial capitals here in London. The world stock markets have been highly volatile since the attack took place, and it's feared, though, that the damage may be far more profound in terms of the markets. Officials at the European Central Bank will meet in Frankfurt later this day to determine whether or not interest rates should be reduced. You can see at the moment what has happened on the commodity markets. Brent crude is now down over $1 a barrel. Gold has also eased off. On the currency rates at the moment, the dollar, which had, of course, weakened, has now put on a bit of strength, now back over 119 Japanese yen. Meanwhile, gold is trading at $279, down $10.80 an ounce. Gold often seen as being the last store of value at times of crisis. Let's catch up with what the markets are expecting in London when they open in just around an hour, half an hour's time. Liz George is at the London Stock Exchange to bring us up to date. Liz?
Richard, the mood really here in London at the moment is extremely depressed and very, very quiet. I think we're going to see more of the same today that we saw yesterday, where you see an awful lot of volatility going on there, but extremely thin trading. The mood here definitely is one of wanting to conduct business as usual, really in defiance of the terrible acts that took place in New York. But the impetus just isn't there. And earlier on, I was talking to Jeremy Stretch from the Royal Bank of Canada, and he was saying that really on his trading floor, for most of the day yesterday, they've got big plasma screens, and half the time they were looking at the trading screens, and the other half the time people were literally just standing there watching the news, watching to see what the latest developments were, and the impetus just wasn't really there. An awful lot of depression, people really wanting to find out about their friends and their colleagues who work, of course, in New York. I mean, these two centres have been very, very closely allied, contact on a daily basis with people in New York, and really just a total feeling of shock and a total feeling of depression. The city, as I was walking into the stock exchange this morning, is a little bit busier than it was yesterday, and there is a feeling of wanting to get going and wanting to try and really, in defiance of everything that's happened, keep business going. But people saying that there's no liquidity there because the US markets are closed, and they're really having to wait until the US markets manage to get themselves up again, up and running again. Now, the bond markets in the US will be working today, but of course the equity markets are going to remain closed and are probably going to remain closed possibly until Friday, maybe Monday. What Jeremy Stretcher was saying was that, of course, they can manage to start working again because a lot of these investment houses have got emergency rooms which are away from the financial centre. They're out in places like New Jersey, on the outskirts of New York. In Long Island is where the Bank of Canada's trading room is, and that's where the operations will begin to get going again once the stock exchange in New York manages to get going. But really, again, it's very depressed. He was saying people just don't really know where to price things at the moment, and the difference between buying and selling prices was just so wide you could drive a truck through it. So it's a real sort of sense of not knowing which way to go. Richard?
Liz George at the London Stock Exchange. Many thanks indeed. Now, David Björk, the marketing editor at Cantor Index, is in London and joins me now with more on the devastation to the global financial community. David, of course, Cantor Fitzgerald, the US arm of the company, one of those very, very seriously hit. Any more you can tell us? We believe there were 800 to 1,000 members of staff working at Cantor. We know that at the moment about 200 to 300 have been accounted for. Any more you can tell me?
Absolutely not, I'm afraid. This is obviously, our thoughts are entirely with our colleagues and their families, and any kind of announcement on that basis until there has been a full head count will, I'm afraid, be kept in head office in New York.
David, I was just saying it's a sad, perhaps, comment, but we do have to talk about what the markets will be making of all of this. Tell us the problems of New York opening. Richard Grasso, the chairman of the exchange, made clear there is power, there is telephones, but there are practical problems, aren't there?
I think people who are unfamiliar with New York as a financial centre, demographically, for want of a better expression, is that the rubble and the general devastation and the huge number of component brokers and banks that had offices in the World Trade Center, they will all have all their computer software duly duplicated. That's not going to be a problem. Settlement's not going to be a problem. The liaison that they have globally with their offices in Europe and also in the Far East is not going to be a problem. What is a problem is replacing the physical side of the business, where it can be traded accurately, where compliance can go, where regulatory controls are comfortable, and also safety, Richard.
I saw one quote from Japan, from one Japanese banker, who said that one reason that there wasn't much trading taking place in Europe and Asia, because let's face it, European banks can still trade between themselves and with Asia, was that, as one banker put it, we aren't about to ditch our morals and speculate at a time like this.
It's a very Japanese comment, and I'm certain it's probably made in the spirit that it was made. Whether you could actually adopt those morals and attitudes for the rest of the world, well, I think that remains to be seen. But I think there is a general feeling that everybody knows that the US stock markets has led the world during the course of the last 20 years. And suddenly, when you don't have them, there is obviously going to be the reticence on the part of traders, because there has been some unkind comments like, oh, well, this means the United States is going to enter recession. I think that's a very strange remark, because we don't know the resolve of the US people. We don't know the level of contribution, which I'm sure will be from central banks, providing liquidity, etc.
David, many thanks indeed. David Björk from Cantor joining me in the studio. That's all from London now. For the moment, back to Relitza in Atlanta.
Richard, thank you. The U.S. Midwest still feels the impact of Tuesday's attacks, but it's an impact of a different kind, one that some are calling completely unnecessary. Gas prices in some states have skyrocketed after the three crashes. Deborah Marchini investigates why.
$4 a gallon in Ohio, and drivers waiting in line for the privilege of paying it. Gasoline, a relative bargain at one Conoco station in Oklahoma at $2.99, if you can get it. But there was none left. The highest price we heard about, $5.19 in Indiana. That came as news to one customer. It jumped from $1.99 while she was filling up.
I thought, well, I should have my car full by now, so I glanced up at the tank, and when I did, it said $42, and I said, whoa, for a half a tank of gas?
Ironically, the farther you travel from the attacks in New York and Washington, the more expensive the gas, the longer the lines. America's heartland is particularly vulnerable to disruptions in gas supplies because its system for moving fuel is overstressed. In the week before the attack, gas in the Midwest cost an average of 12 cents more a gallon than for the country as a whole. Regional psychology also plays a part.
It's like what I call the St. Louis snow effect. One of the things that we see in St. Louis is we have about 4 snowstorms a year. And they're typically not a big deal, doesn't disrupt traffic for very long. But if you go to your local grocery store, you'll find 10 registers running full open with customers 10 deep, all buying milk and bread. And I think American consumers have been trained to believe that if there is some impact that could involve the Middle East, you better gas up. And that's what they did all at once. And the supply system is not geared to handle that sort of surge in demand.
Oil analysts say temporary terminal shutdowns in Louisiana and on both coasts explain some of the rise in gas prices, perhaps a few cents worth. The rest reflects drivers' fear and a desire by gas station owners to take advantage of it.
Consumers should not panic. They should remain calm. Our supplies are fine at this point. There's no need to form long gas lines and thinking that our supplies are going to run out.
Gas station owners were among the few seeking to profit from the pain of terrorism. Though many travelers were stranded by the temporary grounding of flights, AAA says it's had no complaints about attempts to jack up hotel or rental car rates. A host of individuals have tried to auction items related to the Trade Center tragedy on eBay. The company, citing respect for the victims and their kin, has for now suspended sales of items directly related to the Trade Center and the Pentagon. The suspension will last until October 1st. Deborah Marchini, CNN Financial News, New York.
As we've been reporting, the search for survivors of the devastating attacks on the World Trade Center is continuing in New York City, but there's little optimism about finding any more. Officials in the city have asked for 6,000 body bags, a grim reminder of the scale of the devastation. Thousands of U.S. law enforcement officers, meanwhile, are involved in the hunt for those responsible for the attacks. Sources say up to 50 people may have planned and executed them. Several of the suspected hijackers have now been identified, with police searching a number of homes in Florida. 2 men who came to the state for flight training are alleged to have piloted 2 of the crashed aircraft. The FBI says the investigation is moving forward at high speed.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down. We also have identified, through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively.
We go back to New York now, and CNN's Garrick Utley. Garrick?
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We want to take a moment now and address perhaps what is the most painful and certainly personal question in the aftermath of this tragedy. Here's the situation. Imagine for a moment that you are living here in New York City or in the New York area, and that on Tuesday morning your husband or your wife, your spouse or a brother or a sister or even a child who works went off to work in the World Trade Center. And you saw what happened, and that loved one did not come home. Question: how long do you hold out hope? How long can you realistically hold out hope? When is it time to let go? Who tells you it's time to let go realistically? It doesn't get more personal or painful than this, and here's CNN's Elizabeth Cohen with an example.
Andrew Zucker started his day Tuesday on the 86th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. After the first explosion, the one in the North Tower, his wife called.
And he said, I'm okay, I'll call you back, and he hung up.
But then his building blew up.
If I know Andrew, he stopped to help somebody, and I don't even want to think about what happened, and I don't know what happened to him, but he's just not here.
But thinks she must, because like many people who stood in line to find out about their missing loved ones, Erica says she still thinks her husband may still be alive. So while Erica worked the phones Wednesday, her sister, Naomi Konovich, and family friend Susan Feldman went out on a search, one hospital at a time, starting at New York University Medical Center, where there were no answers.
Bellevue, I think, is on like 27th. It's only like 3 or 4 more blocks down.
After Bellevue, on to Beekman Hospital. No one had seen him there either.
Someone told us actually to go over to the medical examiner's office.
They told Naomi to gather dental records and hair samples in case they'd have to identify his body.
They don't have lists of people who were found dead. They don't have anything.
Late in the day, after buying a mask to keep out the dust circulating after all the explosions, she checked yet more public offices. Still, no one had heard of Andrew Zucker.
They said there were a couple of John Does in the hospital. We're hoping to find that maybe one of them is him.
In the end, a frustrated Naomi distributed flyers to the media.
He's about 6'1", heavy set with the big shoulders and a big chest.
While her sister kept up the round of calls to the hospitals, to the morgue.
If you do see him or you're with him, just tell him we all love him and just to hold in there, and we just want him to come home. We need him to come home.
Elizabeth Cohen, CNN, New York.
One family, one case, very painful one of thousands, if you stop and think of it, thousands of families facing a similar dilemma. The search for possible survivors, if there are going to be any at all, it will take weeks, perhaps a month or even more. Who is to say when it's time to let go? Who is to give that answer? Relitza?
And Garrick, certainly the rescuers are searching, but they're going very, very slow because they want to make sure that they avoid anything that could hurt any potential survivors. And also there are many risks involved in the area where they're working.
There are the risks there to the rescue teams. There are also there's the question of moving this material, which could hurt perhaps if someone who is still alive. They have to go very, very carefully. And it's also interesting and important, really, to understand that officials here are being very, very cautious. From the very first day, they have not offered any undue optimism about how this is all going to turn out. They're not making any estimates as to how many are believed to be trapped in the World Trade Center. They just say in the thousands. No false hopes are being raised here by anyone, and that's the harsh reality, and it's tough to take.
Garrick, thank you. And many major events around the world are being cancelled or postponed in the aftermath of the attacks. The United Nations General Assembly decided Wednesday to put off next week's Children's Summit in New York. And officials at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank say they may cancel their annual meeting set for the end of this month in Washington. Sweden is calling off this weekend's summit of leaders from 14 nations. Even baseball, the sport long considered the U.S. pastime, is on hold. All major league games set for Wednesday and Thursday have been canceled.
The U.S. government is also imposing new airline safety procedures after the attacks. Once they take effect, boarding an airplane in this country may never be the same. Charles Feldman has more on that.
Modern life depends heavily upon air transport. Government officials clearly want to get things moving.
All Americans want us to move as quickly and prudently as possible to return our national airspace system to normal. And we will.
But the definition of the word normal will change dramatically by the next time you take a flight. For one thing, you will see a much bigger federal law enforcement role at major airports. Some 400 U.S. Customs agents and 300 Border Patrol officers will join about 300 U.S. deputy marshals to beef up airport security checkpoints. Forget about curbside check-ins. And you will no longer be allowed to check in for a flight at a hotel or other off-airport location. Only passengers with tickets will be permitted to go past airport screeners, and passengers will not be allowed to board any plane carrying any sort of cutting instrument, metal or plastic, and that includes nail files. And now, for the first time in a quarter century, there is discussion about resuming in some form the old Sky Marshal program that placed armed federal agents on select flights from 1971 to 1974 following a rash of hijackings. The cost and feasibility of having federal, state, or municipal law enforcement officials taking over airport security from private firms is also being studied. But who will pay for the new security measures? The airlines? The government? You?
Ultimately, this kind of policy change in the aviation area is going to be borne by one of two groups, either the passengers or the taxpayer. In the short term, of course, it might be other groups such as the airports or the airlines.
And it is that short term that is bound to be the most troubling for the airline industry, already financially weakened by a faltering economy. Add to that, the airlines are losing an estimated $250 million each day while a flight ban remains in effect. But whatever the cost more security will be, safety and terrorism experts say from what we know now, it is unlikely any of the proposed measures could have prevented the sort of attack the world witnessed this week. Charles Feldman, CNN, Los Angeles.
With the Federal Aviation Administration's cancellation of all flights, you might have gotten the impression that there had been no aircraft of any kind in U.S. skies since Tuesday, but that actually hasn't been the case. Joining us from the Pentagon is Mark Potter to explain. Mark.
Well, good morning, Lisa. What many people may not know is that the U.S. military is actually controlling all the airspace over this country right now. All civilian planes, domestic and international, are grounded, and so the only planes in the sky right now belong to the U.S. military. Here in Washington and in New York and other cities, citizens have looked up to see fighter jets flying overhead, and that is known as a combat air patrol, or a CAP, as in putting a cap over a city. This is one of the fighters that we were talking about in Washington. Yeah. The military is expected to return control of these skies back to the civilians, to the FAA. sometime later today. But right now, all the skies over the United States are controlled by the U.S. military. And these types of pictures, these scenes are being seen in cities around the country. Now, elsewhere, the U.S. military is has put some warships and aircraft carriers out. They have been put out along the West Coast and the East Coast. Along the East Coast, 2 carriers and 5 warships. On the West Coast, 1 carrier and 14 warships. That also covers Hawaii. Now, here at the Pentagon itself, even this morning, are still out there in the rubble. They're going through the area, combing through the rubble. They do not expect to find any survivors here, but they say that around 200 people died in the attack, and they are now searching for the bodies, for the remains. The FBI is also here looking for evidence to help build its criminal case. And officials are also out looking for the black boxes, the voice and the data recorders from the aircraft. And it's believed that the discovery of those boxes could be very important and perhaps could answer the question of whether the hijackers actually intended first to attack the White House before turning the plane toward the Pentagon. And that is still being debated as to whether that was the case, and perhaps those black boxes, if found, could answer that. So a lot of things are going on here at the Pentagon, and probably most importantly for the officials here at the Pentagon, they are saying that the building will be fully operational tomorrow. At least all personnel will be here tomorrow, although half the building is shut down, shut off, cordoned off by armed guards because of the attack earlier this week. Back to you.
Mark, can you tell us more about the scene, the mood at the Pentagon? We've had this picture of the Pentagon with a huge American flag. Can you tell us something more about the mood?
Well, there's a sense of pride here in what they do and a resolve to do what needs to be done next. We don't have any sense of a timetable on that. But there are a lot of people who are walking around this building talking about what happened to them. We had a captain walk in here talking about where she was when the plane struck, and also talking about the fact that her husband, who also works in the building, was very near the spot where the plane hit. And she talked about that moment when she placed the call to her husband to find out what happened to him. The same sort of stories that we hear in New York are being heard here. When it all boils down, it's a human story more than anything else.
Mark, thank you.
And for every victim of Tuesday's attack, there are many broken hearts. Families and friends are beginning to come forward now to give a human face to the tragedy. They're telling the stories of the loved ones they've lost.
This is a painful time for my family and all of America. My brother was Charles F. Burlingame III. He was the captain of American Airlines Flight 77. Chick was a Naval Academy graduate appointed by the President of the United States. He was a Navy fighter pilot and a recently retired decorated captain in the U.S. Naval Reserve, and was a seasoned captain for American Airlines. He grew up right here in Southern California, graduating from Anaheim High School. He was a longtime Angels fan, and he loved the Lakers. Today was his birthday. He would have been 52 years old. He was a beloved son, father, husband, brother, and friend.
A long healing process is also beginning for those who did not perish in the attacks. Every survivor has a story, as our colleague Paula Zahn learned a short time ago.
We were on the 98th floor of 2 World Trade Center. It was about a few minutes to 9. We were at our desks, and the person who sits behind me, thank God, Sandra, was the first to see the flames that were coming from the impact from 1 World Trade Center. And she screamed, "It's a bomb, let's get out of here." And that just sent us all running. We ran to the staircase. We ran down 20 flights of stairs from 98 to 78. And I was so lucky I got on the first elevator down. And it's the express elevator down to floor 1. When we got to floor 1, we had people telling us to just get out of there, get out of there. And as soon as we got to the door leading to the outside, we heard this noise. I call it the sound of destruction, because that's all you could really think that it was. And you just heard this massive sound. What I later learned was the plane crashing into the building and debris falling and people screaming.
Important players ever since Tuesday's dramatic events include the emergency workers who've risked their lives to help. One New York doctor rushed to the area of the Twin Towers carrying only his medical bag and his video camera, and we were able to show you some of the footage Dr. Mark Heath shot on Tuesday shortly after the disaster. Now we've had a chance to talk to him. Here's his story in his own words.
They told me just to wait here at this semi-staging area. See if I can help, so that's what I'm doing. My name's Mark Heath. I'm a cardiac anesthesiologist at Columbia Presbyterian on 168th Street. We saw that 2 planes had flown into the World Trade Center. Thought that they would need all hands on deck. So I hopped into some scrubs and grabbed some medical stuff and just grabbed an ambulance stops. I hopped in. Maybe leave the keys in the car so they can move it if they have to. Is there a staging area?
They're evacuating this whole area.
Yeah, but they had people who are hurt, right? They're going to pull them out.
Estimate is we probably lost 200 firefighters.
Oh my God.
And God knows how many thousands of people.
Yeah. Okay. So you want me to wait right here? Okay.
And stay away from any other high-rise building.
Okay. Let's just station up right here, okay? All right. Why don't we set up? We were instructed by a fire chief to start setting up the staging area right there. Then the second building came down. I videoed what I could, got behind a car. I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. Everything went black. My eyes are open, and unless I've been blinded, it is black as night. Just tried to breathe. I was behind a car. I tried to smash one of the car windows so that I could climb into the car and get some fresh air, but I couldn't break the window, so just sort of went down into the gutter under the car. I'm sorry I came down. I just had to help people. I think I actually said into the microphone, I sort of apologized to my family for going down and trying to help, because I really didn't think I was going to make it out. Okay, I'm going to have to go find people who need help. I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm seeing a couple of clean breaths. It was hard to see. Everybody's eyes were full of dust and stinging, so it's actually quite hard to see anything.
Okay.
Back to you. It's 10:41 a.m. I can't do very much because I can't see. My eyes are full of stuff. There was initially complete disarray. All the emergency crews, the firemen and the policemen. Do you have an extra mask?
No, I just gave it out. You all right, Tom?
Yeah, I'm good. See if we can help anybody. They won't let me go any closer. No one can go in to get the people out. There's small explosions still going on. So they have hurt people over there?
Yeah, they got people over there. We've been pulling out. We've done about 3 trips already also.
Okay. Having seen the buildings come down, I was expecting an enormous number of casualties, and it is striking how few injured people there actually were. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people who were in the building perished in the building.
And nobody moving on the Bell Parkway on the westbound side up and beyond Pennsylvania Avenue.
It's not a thing that you think about. You just move, try to get out of the way. That's it. Be thankful that I wasn't in closer. The bravery of the people who went in there is something else. Yeah. It's just a wasteland.
The words and images of volunteer rescuer Dr. Mark Heath.
For all the people directly touched by the devastating attacks, many others were simply touched from a distance. Across the country, they're coming together to remember the victims and pray.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Members of Congress held a vigil Wednesday in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. Lawmakers from both parties are expressing solidarity in the face of tragedy. A public memorial was held just outside the White House Wednesday night. One man said he turned out to support President Bush as he decides how to respond to the attacks. 1,000 people gathered in New York's Washington Square Park, not far from the site of the devastation. They held a candlelight vigil to remember the victims. Officials have said they expect the death toll to reach into the thousands. The coordinated attacks on New York and Washington did more than just physical damage. They shattered the American assumption that bad things just don't happen here. As Ann McDermott reports, many people in the U.S. have been left ill at ease.
These visitors are stuck in L.A., so they idle over breakfast and hope for open airports, which scares them to death.
Like right now, in this moment, I'm just not ready to get on a plane.
So she's going to drive from California to Maryland, and everyone at this table understands.
We're going to be nervous for a long time.
Maybe only the littlest among us are not. But listen to this little one's mother.
The scary thing being what's going to happen next, and knowing this is just the beginning, and that there's going to be something that's going to happen next. We don't know what that is.
Maybe another high-rise plane crash? Images like this give magazine editor Wayne Friedman, in his own high-rise, lots to think about.
And I realized, whoa, yeah, that's a consideration. That's something I should be wary of.
But Friedman said this image was worse.
That's when it really affected me, when I was watching these people dangling off the edge.
People are scared, but most say they won't let it take over their lives. Like this Russian immigrant, now a U.S. citizen.
I have been in Italy, I have been in Austria, I saw Europe, I lived 32 years in Russia, but this is the best place in the world.
But this best place in the world is different now. Just ask the people at this seniors complex in Los Angeles. People like Jules Berlinski, who landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, but never saw anything like this. Ask Beatrice Lowe, who lived in New York, loved its skyline, loved the Twin Towers.
It was so beautiful. Then this happens. God, where are you?
Berlinski has a question for the terrorists.
Wherever they are now, I'd like to ask them, was it worth it?
Ann McDermott, CNN, Los Angeles.
They told us